G'day mate, 40 here. So it's January 7th here right now, but it's January 6th in the United States, and the news media is engaged in a big orgy of introspection and retrospection. Now, the true meaning of the January 6th riots and our democracy's under threat. I mentioned in my earlier video, I don't think the January 6th riots pose any threat to our democracy. Okay? I mean, the riots were quelled, and it was dealt with, and the people who participated in the riots and engaged in illegal behavior, by and large, being tracked down, arrested, and charged. So I don't see any threat to our democracy. But let's reconsider some things about the January 6th riots. So I was broadcasting after the high point of the riots. So I think I started broadcasting about 1:30 p.m. California time. And I think the riots had just peaked. But I remember from the chat, like, everyone was incredibly enthused, was stirred, was excited, was fired up. Like, the reaction to my chat was, this was wonderful. And I thought it was a wonderful spectacle. It was like an amazing event that I could never have anticipated. But I didn't think it was a good thing. Like, I immediately thought, what are going to be the consequences of this? Like, we're going to have more speech crackdowns, and yes, we have. Like, we're going to have less freedom as a result of reactions to these riots. Yes, we're going to have less freedom. People who advocate a right-wing response, that they're going to face increasing marginalization or increasing stress or increasing government investigation. Like, when the government investigates you, you're in trouble, because the government has an awful lot of resources. And any one of us, if we poked into our lives deeply enough, you'd find all sorts of things that would look horrible to an outside perspective. So January 6th riots brought speech crackdown, fundraising crackdowns, tremendous blowback against the right wing and Republicans and Trump supporters. And I believe I anticipated this January 6th last year when I was broadcasting. I immediately thought, this is going to be horrible, right? It's what Tom Sowell calls first stage thinking. You don't think about the implications of what you're doing. Like, many people just think in first stage thinking. So I'm going to do X, and there won't be any consequences. But it's childish. Like, for every action we do, there's a reaction. And so, for example, Black Lives Matter overall has reduced support for black causes among non-black Americans. And Antifa acts out and increases support for law and order and for Republicans. So without Black Lives Matter riots and the Antifa riots of 2020, I think Trump would have been defeated much more handily by Joe Biden, but he was able to make it close thanks to reactions, particularly among many non-white voters, of, we want law and order. We're seeing Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and we're frightened. What's going on there? So there's the cricket field down the bottom of the street. Some high quality cricket here in Coogee. Feels great to be back in Sydney. The big smoke, big city. So in Australia, you call the outback whoop whoop. So I was lost in whoop whoop. So there are a whole bunch of movies, I think Wake in Fright, about getting lost in the outback. And the latest is a mini-series on Stan, co-produced by the BBC, called The Tourist. And I didn't care for it. I guess some would argue it was smart, and the TV critics loved the show, but there's no one I could root for, right? I need people to root for. I'm not going to get engaged in a movie or a novel or a film unless there are people I can root for. And so The Tourist just left me completely cold. I notice that with a lot of other critically praised movies. I guess critics, because they see so many movies, they particularly need novelty. But I think for regular people, we want an emotional catharsis. We want to experience something. So I notice a lot of critically praised movies, TV shows have kind of left me cold. They just don't engage me. They don't involve me. I don't root for anyone. Like if I'm watching a sporting event and it doesn't include one of my favorite teams, then I don't feel much emotional connection. No. So it just kind of leaves me cold. Now, January 6 riots, I share some of the right-wing Trumpist inclinations of the crowd that committed those criminal acts. But my reaction to how law enforcement should respond is identical to if the January 6 rioters were Black Lives Matter or Antifa. Right? It doesn't matter to me if the rioters are right-wing or left-wing. Right? If Black Lives Matter, they trash the United States Capitol. Antifa trashed the United States Capitol. Like left-wing unions have done it, or American Chamber of Commerce have done it. G'day, mate. Like my reaction would be the same. So what disappointed me was the overwhelmingly positive reaction by the people in my chat to the January 6 riots. They were like thrilled. And I immediately thought, we're going to have less speech, less freedom, fewer fundraising opportunities. It's going to be used to tar and feather all Trump supporters. Like, this is a disaster. Absolute disaster. And I don't buy Tucker Carlson's conspiracy theorizing that it was really left-wing agitators who ginned up the January 6 rioters. That's absurd. It was absurd from the get-go. That's Coogee Beach. Coogee, it's an Aboriginal word, means smelly. The beach is regarded as smelly because there's lots of seaweed. Generally speaking, if you get big waves like this in Coogee, then the other beaches are going to be closed. Generally, Coogee has only very placid, gentle waves. When you get big waves in Coogee, then if there's a cyclone offshore or something like that, then the other beaches are going to get closed down. But they can't force you not to swim. They just withdraw lifeguards and strongly advise you not to swim. So that's an example of the government, intervening against the individual's freedom. Where is the sun? Well, this is the middle of summer, and it's been raining all morning. But it's a perfectly nice 80 degrees outside, so it's warm. But generally rains more in the summer than in the winter here. So Sydney gets about 4 times the amount of annual rainfall as Los Angeles. Look at that. This is the Australian Temple. The beach. All right, so I think one thing that united the January 6 rioters was a sense of victimhood is like absolutely intoxicating. And a moderate amount of victimhood can serve you, right? So obviously, the sense of victimhood was too intense that the January 6 rioters drank from. So if they'd had, say, 1/10 the amount of victimhood, that would have given them a sense of purpose in life. It would have bonded them with other people, would have given them energy, but wouldn't have provided so much high-octane fuel, they would have gone out and committed crimes. Great public resources here. Look at this lovely drinking fountain. Absolutely beautiful. So, depending on the situation, like victimhood serves you to varying degrees. If you need a tremendous amount of energy, like high-octane fuel, like people committing the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution of 1917, then you need maximum amounts of victimhood, because that's rocket fuel, that's high-octane, to energize you and bond you to others and commit you to the cause. But if you have that high-octane fuel of victimhood and you're living in the United States of America, which is by and large a law-abiding society, that can tip you over the edge. So the Black Lives Matter rioters had a very strong sense of victimhood. And the Antifa rioters had a very strong sense of victimhood. And so if they'd been able to dial it back to about 10% of what they had, they would have still gotten group cohesion, and they still would have gotten energy and purpose, an identity, but they wouldn't have been fueled to commit so many criminal acts. And so, generally speaking, across society, there was enormous backlash to Black Lives Matter. So less support for Black Lives Matter, black causes, after the black BLM riots than before among non-blacks. So in our daily life, more than a small amount of victimhood does not serve us, right? So to fuel an in-group identity, yeah, a small amount of victimhood serves you, like all nationalism depends upon a sense of victimhood. So a little bit of victimhood, a little bit of resentment against outgroups, that can fuel your in-group identity, your in-group cohesion, give you a little bit of energy and purpose, and kind of clarify life so you know who your friends are and who your enemies are. But once you start turning up that victimhood dial, it doesn't really serve you, because it distracts you from the things that you can influence, like family, friends, your career, your education, your skills, your pursuit of spiritual peace, right? Observed in daily life in an industrialized nation by a high sense of victimhood. So it's all about turning the dial up and down. Like, I love strong in-group identity. I love feeling it among my fellow Trump supporters, or fellow Republicans, or my fellow Americans, or my fellow Dallas Cowboy supporters, or my fellow Australians, or fellow Jews. But identity, absolutely essential. To me, a tremendous source of my energy and enthusiasm. But as Jonathan Haidt says, identity binds and blinds. It blinds you. So that's why I like doing these streams, because it forces me to get outside of my habitual identities and to do a show where I try to understand things from multiple points of view. So yeah, I'm a Dallas Cowboy supporter. Sometimes I want to try to shift to a more objective perspective. Yeah, I'm a Republican voter, but sometimes I want to shift to an objective perspective. Look, you're going to miss the Australian Open. I'm vaccinated, mate. You can't deny me. I was thinking about going to the third day of the fourth test match. Is it the third test match? No, it's the fourth. So between Australia and England, it's getting played about 3 miles from here at the Sydney Cricket Ground. But I looked up the ticket prices, and like $53 is the cheapest ticket. $53. Okay, you're not willing to pay $53 to watch some test cricket. Particularly as the day's going to frequently get interrupted by rain. I don't really care as much about tennis. Like I cared a bit about tennis when John McEnroe was playing, and Jimmy Connors and Bjorn Borg and Boris Becker. So in the late 70s, the 80s, I cared about tennis. The personalities were that compelling. But now I don't really care. So on a walk, I think I might go to Bondi. Let's go on a long walk about. Say the BLM riots or the Antifa riots, because think about how many people died as a result of the Ferguson effect in the summer of George. Thousands and thousands of Americans died because of the huge increase in murder rates due to Black Lives Matter rioting, which led to police backing off, which led to more opportunities to commit murder. So thousands of people died as a result of the huge increase in murder rate following the Ferguson effect in the summer of George Floyd. Right, so to to me, the Black Lives Matter riots and the Antifa riots, the Ferguson effect, all this agitation against cops being racist for the last, 7 years, to me it's 100 times more serious than the January 6th riots where virtually nobody died, maybe one or two. But I guess that massive discrepancy in life just doesn't matter to our media elite. So when you compare the amount of attention given to the January 6th riots to the Black Lives Matter riots, now I get that rioting in the US Capitol is more serious, right? So you had left-wing agitators in Wisconsin rioting against Republican Governor Scott Walker, and they took over the state capitol. So taking over a federal capital, yeah, it's more serious than the state capitol. And rioting in any capital, is more serious than rioting at a Kmart or a Woolworths. So I don't think the media attention to the January 6th riots is, wholly foolish. Now, I think it's probably magnified by, I don't know, somewhere between, gets 10 to 100 times more attention than I think it deserves. That's my view. But I read a lot of reports on January 6th riots and looked at some of the documentaries. But compared to the Black Lives Matter riots, I think it's getting disproportionate attention. Now, I don't think we're living in a police state just because of the reaction to January 6th. Right? In a more repressive state, the law enforcement would have opened up with machine guns. So I don't think the legal response, by and large, to the January 6th rioters has been disproportionate. Now, there may be individual cases where it's disproportionate, but overall, I don't feel much sympathy for the January 6th rioters. The law enforcement response seems to make sense to me. But I want that same sort of rigorous response to Black Lives Matter riots that disrupted the lives of tens of millions of Americans. Put millions of Americans in fear for their life and property, damage the livelihoods of thousands of Americans, did billions and billions of dollars worth of damage. And at the same time, this terrorist group, Black Lives Matter, they got subsidized by Fortune 500 companies. They were on the way to Bondi from Coogee. So I'm walking north from Coogee along Sydney's eastern suburbs. So I think many of LA's problems could be solved with less affordable housing, because in the eastern suburbs, rental prices and home prices discriminate, so you don't have to. So there's no rent control here in Sydney. And rents just respond to supply and demand. So there was an article in Reason a couple of years ago about how Sydney rents were going down because due to the demand, there'd been a big surge in building apartments. But Los Angeles has extensive rent control. Santa Monica's rent control. And so for the affordable housing, you have millions of people in Los Angeles in a free market could not afford to live here. And so Los Angeles and California in general are heavily subsidizing dysfunctional behavior. And so your neighborhoods like South Central, right? That is prime real estate. It's next to downtown LA. The weather's beautiful. You're 15, 20 minutes drive from the beach. Like prime real estate, you should have a lot of up and coming people moving there. I'm gonna first get Susan W to put down the ham sandwich, then look, damn, Zimmer's looking great. So I think many of LA's problems are because we have too much affordable housing. Right? It subsidizes dysfunction. So no rent control that I'm aware of in Sydney. And so There's no crime around here because pretty much everyone who lives here is an upstanding citizen who works hard. Like Sydney is like the fourth safest city in the world. Right? Australia overall is really safe, but there's so much funding of the dysfunctional in California. And I think making housing affordable is really the big problem. And there's Sheila mermaids. Oh, mate, those are secrets that I can't tell you over YouTube. So I haven't seen any drunk and disorderly conduct while I've been here. I haven't seen any unpleasant interactions since I've been here. The siren's calling to Luke from the waters. Yeah, I think I might walk to Bondi. Great surf at Bondi Beach. Go body surfing there. Yeah, we've had a cyclone offshore for the past week. That's given us just ripper waves, mate. High tides, really exciting times out in the ocean. I was just reflecting this morning that one question I haven't asked is, what does God want me to do? Does God want me to move to Sydney, or does God want me to move to LA? So I'll admit I haven't thought about that. And I haven't thought about, where can I be of more service? Like, where can I help more people? Like, that's how my dad would think. He was choosing between LA and Sydney, but I admit I haven't been thinking in those terms. Need to see your mama, Luke, since JF found his mama in Santa Monica. So remember after the 2020 election, JF was doing all these shows about Release the Kraken, Sidney Powell's Release the Kraken, and Lynn Wood, and giving all this credulous support and airtime to the fraudulent voter fraud case. Man, it didn't stand up very well, did it? Right? So it's about 15 months now from the 2020 elections. The evidence comes in, it's more and more clear the voter fraud did not play a significant role in the 2020 elections. So yeah, JF just seems to seize on things. Like, he changed his whole mind on vaccines. He went from indifferent to opposed based on one fraudulent study by a couple of anti-vaxxers. And then I haven't heard from people who believe that voter fraud played a big role in 2020. As the evidence has come in, I haven't noticed anyone changing their minds. And I haven't noticed anyone changing their minds about the January 6th riots either among my chatters. Like, it was obvious that it was a disaster from day one. I think we have fewer freedoms now as a result of the January 6th riots. Like, we have more of a situation where the government is hostile to Americans. Like, we have more restrictions on fundraising. We have more government investigation of the right wing. Like, the January 6th riots were an absolute disaster for the Trumpist and right wing cause. Now, on the other hand, the Democrats have endured even bigger disasters. So, in the midst of a huge crime wave, and even liberals don't like huge rates of crime. Biden hasn't been able to get anything done. So I think shortly after it became clear that Biden was going to be elected, I made the case against panicking. Like, it did not seem to me that Biden was going to be able to get a lot done. So I'm much more of a structuralist than most people who pay attention to politics. Like, I think it's the structure that has more to do with how politics works than personalities. So whether Donald Trump or Joe Biden is in office, it only matters mildly, moderately. Look, does it violate the terms of service to use the word that rhymes with Hindu? I'm not sure. Where's the guy with dreadlocks for roller skating while playing guitar? So we're a year into Joe Biden's term, and he hasn't been able to get almost anything done. So I don't think the Joe Biden presidency has been any great disaster, because it's the structure of the situation. There's much more than personalities. You know, whether it's Tony Blair or Boris Johnson as Prime Minister of England, it only matters maybe 5 to 10%. It's the structure, right? So that's Tom Wolfe's analogy about US politics. It's a train going down the track. Does the lack of social tension make life exciting? Well, the lack of social tension makes it really easy to connect with people. Because you don't have to worry so much about putting a foot wrong, because you're not going to have people like getting all, you know, up in your grill, all right? So people are friendly, and there's, you know, not a sense you have to be constantly on guard. So social cohesion, social trust. Good times. Hey, I think you're supposed to go that way, mate. Hey, come on, mate. You're supposed to go that way. Come on. Whoops. Come on. Come on. Come on. How are you?
We saw a cat.
Oh.
And he's very excited.
Oh, of course.
It's the first cat
Cats are
encounter.
the best.
Cats are the best. Sid,
Next to dogs.
naughty boy.
Come on, Sid. Listen to your master. It's just so easy to talk to people here. So you just walk down the street, it's like, g'day mate, g'day mate. How are you, mate? No worries, mate. Hey, dinkum. Rightio. That's all right. But on the downside, the news is really boring here. Like, what tops the news is the number of like COVID cases, and you know, the number of little changes that the government makes in response to COVID cases. So we've had like nightlife shutting down here in New South Wales, got even more restrictions in Victoria. Oh, we've had a big increase in people wearing masks outside. Oh, and in Queensland, like I was in Tennant Sands, central Queensland, where almost nobody wore masks. And then, because nobody had COVID in Tennant Sands that tested positive, as far as I'm aware. Now dozens have tested positive. So I noticed my brother operates a gun center. Like, mask compliance was like above 95%. So Australians are larrikins, and they have a brash image. I was just watching, there's a terrific documentary series on the Ashes, which is the cricket competition between Australia and England. And it mentioned that Australians are more brash, more risk-taking than the English. The English are nicer and more polite. So the Australians are more aggressive. So they're more willing to risk getting out for the sake of scoring runs. But Australians are still incredibly law-abiding. Still incredibly law-abiding. So pretty much everyone go to the garden centre or go to the chemist in Queensland, they're all pretty much wearing their masks. There's very little opposition. Even the seagulls are friendly here. The seagulls aren't afraid. It'd be funny if I slept and fell into the ocean. At least my iPhone is waterproof. I love the ocean, mate. I love the ocean. It's such a healthy place. I love being battered by the waves. Nice things, cool, cozy. My dad loved the ocean. It was like the only time that he'd sleep well, when he'd get to swim in the ocean every day, the battering of the waves, and just relaxing.
Love the smell. Love the fresh air by the ocean. It's renewed my neshama. No question, quality of life is much higher here. Walking down the street, much more of a pleasant experience. Riding public transport, social amenities. Like you go to public restrooms here, they all have toilet paper. Like reams and reams of toilet paper. Like all sorts of public amenities you couldn't have in Los Angeles because they would just get destroyed. But here you get all sorts of prompts for good behavior. People by and large follow the prompts. I haven't seen any leaf blowers in Sydney. Oh, so everyone does their own yard work, I've noticed in Sydney. Right? People look after their own kids, or they send them to childcare, but not many people have nannies, right? I haven't encountered anyone in Sydney who has a nanny. Now, I'm sure there are some, but I think proportionally much fewer than in Los Angeles. People seem to all do their own yard work, or they hire white people to cut their grass. Yeah, I don't see any empty beer bottles, liquor bottles. I run into very few drunks. And people take care of the wildlife, they take care of the social amenities, they don't rip off the toilet paper and public loos. They don't destroy rare wildlife. Like I was swimming in a beach yesterday, and I was able to like pet the groper, the blue groper. It's a fish, right? It's a protected fish, and I was just able to swim along with my snorkel and pet it. Right? And so, like much of the plant life and the animal life around here is protected, and people abide by it. Right? They're not wrecking the place. So people are much more willing to invest in public goods if they're not going to be destroyed by angry, rampaging youths. So Australians don't tend to be as like outwardly patriotic as Americans, but they're much more cohesive and they're much more willing to pitch in and to sacrifice for the greater good and to look out for their fellow Aussies. Oh yeah, Clovelly. This is the beach I was at yesterday, able to pat the blue gropers, like these big fish that swim along. Sometimes bull sharks get in here, but they don't bite me. Yeah, so this is Clovelly. It's midway between Coogee and Bondi. But like at every beach, there's like a lifesaver club, like life-saving. Big part of the culture here. Now it's the middle of summer right now, or it's about 2-3 weeks into summer. But you still get rain, it still gets overcast. You wouldn't believe the wildlife. You go snorkeling, I mean, you see these most beautiful birds. Whoa! I just received a big donation. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, I hear from like right-wing Jews, like Jews who are interested in the alt-right, but they don't want to go off the deep end. So I'm like someone they can talk to. People who are interested in the wildlife, but don't want to get sucked into it. So that's kind of fun. That's one of the positive externalities from doing this, is you get to meet a lot of interesting people. Like, I don't have the huge audience, I don't have the big audience that I used to have, but I have really good quality people who watch this show. Like people who have jobs, people who have graduate degrees, people who love to learn. Snorkeling and seeing birds. Oh, but the birds, mate, just beautiful. I mean, lithe youth, man. I just love it. Makes me feel young again.
God made me this way. Now, we had Cronulla riots about 15 years ago because there was a bit of a culture clash between Lebanese and the Muslims and regular Australians. So apparently some of the Lebanese, the Lebos and the Muslims, they would mock and denigrate the Aussie women who would wear bikinis to the beach. So the Aussie men then rose up. So what church is for Americans, the beach is for Australians. People come here with their computers, their iPhones, very happily leave them on the beach, go for a swim, come back, and they're still there. People are so fit. I see very few fat people here on the eastern suburbs. Like, it's just a really aesthetically pleasing experience to walk along the eastern suburbs of Sydney. Now, in regional Australia, you find a lot more fat people. So in like poorer areas, you find a lot more fat people. But you go into a high rise, not many fat people. Luke, do I think that Ashley Babbitt got what she deserved? I wouldn't phrase it that way. I would say that her actions precipitated what happened to her. That she acted in a way that brought about that result. Right? So, a police officer pulls a gun on you, and you charge that police officer with a gun. Right? You disobey police officers, and I'm not surprised if they shoot you. Right? So, I don't lose sleep about what happened to Ashley Babbitt. She engaged in incredibly self-destructive behavior. January 6 rioters engaged in incredibly socially destructive and self-destructive behavior. So it wouldn't have surprised me if the cops had just opened fire on the crowd. Wouldn't have surprised me if there weren't hundreds of casualties. Right? You try to riot and overtake Capitol Hill, then I think cops would be within their rights to open fire. And I would say that too for demonstrators who block highways or block other government buildings, and the cops have to open fire to protect them. JF rode the super chat wave, yeah. So JF and academic age, they essentially follow the super chat wave. They say what their audience wants to hear. Would the response to Ashley Babbitt have been different if she were black? Yeah, I think there would have been, 5%, 10% less likelihood of getting shot. So statistics show that the police are less likely to shoot blacks than other groups because they know how much a response they'll get. So yeah, less likely to get shot if you were black. Did you see the Antifa plants that broke those windows before she went in? I'm skeptical of those claims that there were Antifa plants that were, ginning up the agitation. Like, once you make the case that voter fraud determined the 2020 election, then these kind of riots are inevitable. So Trump and his team did pave the way for these riots. Donald played a significant role in creating the January 6 riots. Because once you make the case that the election was fraudulent, a bogus case, then you're letting people off the hook of moral responsibility because you are fueling them with a sense of victimhood, such a strong sense of victimhood that the whole country has been stolen from them, that then there are no moral limits to how people will respond. So Trump helped create a situation where there are no limits to how people would respond. A bunch of lefty articles against the regime, why no action taken. So the left has played the January 6 riots much more effectively than the riot, it seems like. But I don't believe in massive voter fraud in American elections. But I recognize that Democrats believe nonsense about the 2016 elections. So by and large, according to polls, Democrats believe the 2016 elections were illegitimate because of Russian interference. Republicans believe the 2020 elections were illegitimate. So I don't think Republicans are any more deluded. It's just kind of a groupthink mentality. It's like typical reaction when your team loses is you blame it on the refs. So sense of victimhood that Republicans might develop from this, it may well give them more power and influence and propel them to victory. So I don't believe in the case for massive voter fraud, but I recognize it can unite people. So I'm skeptical of the case that January 6 riots were primarily engineered and carried out by left-wing anti-Trump agitators. It seems pretty clear to me that the crowd was pro-Trump and whipped up by Trump. And when you look at the individuals involved, you can see generally kind of a sad trajectory, such as when you don't have a normal amount of human connection, you develop a desperate need for meaning. So many of the people who participated in the January 6 riots had this desperate need for meaning. And so when you have a desperate need for something, you tend to make really bad choices. And so out of their desperation, out of the sense that the country was being stolen from them, they made really bad choices. So there are much more effective things that you can do if you feel like the country's being stolen from you. Because the riot only encouraged the opposition and discredited the Trumpist cause to people who might otherwise be open to it. So I think it's a really bad idea to disobey police instructions. I think it's a really bad idea to charge police who have drawn weapons pointing at you. And I think it's a really bad idea to add to the tension levels of police or anyone. So whenever you up the tension levels with anyone, people are much more likely to overreact, right? So to react in ways that you don't anticipate. So yelling at police, threatening police, charging police, I think is a really bad idea, whether you're on the right or the left. So I don't believe the left played a significant role in infiltrating the alt-right with regard to Charlottesville. I think the alt-right made most of its mistakes on its own. And it's always very tempting when you got a strong group identity to blame your troubles on outgroups. And I think most of our troubles are within ourselves and within our own group. So just like Charlottesville resulted in a huge decrease in social media freedom and ability to fundraise, and just destroyed the alt-right in terms of polite society. And so too the January 6th Capitol Hill riots did damage to the cause. Because of all their democratic mistakes, Republicans probably overcome the own goal that they suffered on January 6th. Take back the House, take back the Senate. Probably a pretty good position for the 2024 presidential election. Which I think regular people are just tired of the skyrocketing crime. And Joe Biden, one of his major election pledges was that he was going to fix COVID. Well, more people have died of COVID under Biden than under Trump. Now, I don't think that's primarily Biden's trouble, but he ran his 2020 campaign in large part on false pretenses that he could control COVID. Obviously, he hasn't been able to. So he's proven to be highly ineffective president, much more ineffective than Trump, looks like. Can't get any legislation passed. Okay, now we're moving towards Bondi. So George Soros will mess up Australian expat. Well, I don't believe that George Soros has as much power as many people on the right claim. I just think he's very effective. So why can't the opposition to George Soros be as effective as George Soros? Like, why can't people on my side of the political spectrum be as effective as people who are my enemies? Because Australia very strictly controls immigration, it's able to keep wages high, social services high, and it's the best country in the world for an average bloke. And one of the richest countries in the world per capita. And probably one of the top 5 luckiest countries to be born in. Now the downside of all this prosperity, happiness and goodness is that the news is very boring here. So we get huge doses of American news. We just don't have enough crime and dysfunction here to keep for an exciting news show. I like the Sydney Morning Herald. I like the Australian and the Melbourne Age. So those would be my 3 favorite Australian newspapers.